Yeah, right, and I am Michael Jordan. King James would never crawl into this grease-stained hellhole to eat a $5 waffle made by a failure like you. Pack your pathetic things and get out of my sight. The vicious words shattered the heavy silence of the cramped back office like cold glass breaking on concrete. Garrick Vance slammed his heavy fist onto the laminate desk, causing a half-empty mug of stale coffee to rattle violently against a pile of past-due utility notices. Clara Evans did not blink, her eyes remaining fixed on the low-resolution security footage looping on the desktop screen. On the monitor, a towering figure wearing a wet baseball cap was quietly eating a plate of food in the dark corner booth of the Rusty Anchor Diner. The timestamp on the screen glowed a bright, accusing neon green. 11:47 p.m. The cheap plastic name tag pinned to Clara's faded blue uniform throbbed against her chest with every shallow breath she took. She could hear the mechanical, rhythmic ticking of the wall clock behind her, counting down the brutal end of her 7-year career at the diner. Garrick extended his hand, his fingers twitching with a deep agitation born from his own hidden financial failures. He wanted her apron, he wanted the key to the back door, and he wanted her gone before the franchise owner arrived for the morning inspection. But nobody in that room understood what was actually written on that faded piece of paper yet. The stale air inside the Rusty Anchor Diner always smelled of 3 distinct things: rancid vegetable oil, industrial lemon bleach, and the damp wool of coats belonging to desperate people. Outside, the freezing Indiana winter was turning the cracked asphalt of Broadway Street into a dark, lethal sheet of black ice under the gray sky. Rain mixed with heavy slush beat a relentless, rhythmic tattoo against the thick plate glass windows, fogging the edges until the outside world disappeared completely. Clara moved down the narrow aisle with a quiet, practiced grace, her worn sneakers making no sound against the yellowed linoleum floor that had been scrubbed down to the bare concrete. Her lower back burned with a dull, familiar ache that usually crept in around the 10th hour of her double shift. She reached deep into her apron pocket, her calloused fingers brushing against a cheap, neon orange rubber band with frayed edges. It was a simple wristband her 8-year-old daughter, Paige, had found near the broken chain-link fence of the community courts. The band had the words "I promise" molded into the cheap silicone, though the white paint had long since peeled away from months of sweat and hard play. That small piece of synthetic rubber was the only anchor keeping Clara upright tonight. A silent reminder of the $400 fee for the elite statewide youth basketball camp due by Friday noon. Near the front counter, an old regular named Thomas lowered his heavy ceramic mug mid-sip, his tired eyes tracking the slow movement of Clara's hands. The diner was dead silent except for him and the low, vibrational hum of the ancient milkshake mixer behind the counter. The kitchen door swung open an inch, releasing a sudden hiss of hot steam from the dishwashing station where the line cook was scraping the flat-top grill. Everyone who worked the night shift knew the golden rule. The kitchen closed at 11:30 p.m., the lights were cut at 11:45 p.m., and by midnight the heavy deadbolt on the front door was thrown to keep the street out. Then, the small brass bell above the heavy wooden entrance door chimed, its sharp ring piercing the low hum of the kitchen like an electric shock. Clara turned her head toward the front, the damp cleaning rag freezing in her hand as a gust of freezing wind swept across the room. A flurry of melting sleet sprayed across the welcome mat, instantly turning into a dark, muddy puddle under the dim lights. The man who stepped through the doorway had to bend his torso significantly to clear the low wooden frame, his massive shoulders blocking out the faint light from the street lamp outside. He wore a heavy, unbranded, black work jacket dripping with gray water and a plain dark cap pulled down so low it cast his entire face into absolute shadow. He stood on the mat for 3 long seconds, his chest rising and falling in a slow, deep rhythm that felt like the quiet idle of a massive engine. Garrick's cruel voice echoed from her memories, reminding her of the final warning she had received for giving a free bowl of soup to a freezing regular last November. But as Clara looked at the massive stranger standing in the doorway, she did not see a threat or a corporate violation. She saw the heavy, exhausting slump of a man who carried the weight of an entire world on his shoulders, his large hands tucked deep into his pockets for warmth. "Come on in," Clara said, her voice dropping into a soft, steady tone that held no judgment. "Just try to order something simple if you can, because the kitchen is already cleaning up for the night." The tall man stopped in his tracks, his head tilting upward just enough for the harsh fluorescent bulb to catch the clean edge of his jawline and the intense, watchful depth of his eyes. He did not say a word immediately. Instead, he let his gaze slowly scan the empty diner, taking in the spotless stainless steel counters and the quiet dignity of old Thomas. A faint, incredibly brief smile touched the corner of his mouth before his face returned to a mask of quiet, solemn exhaustion. "Thank you," the man said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that physically vibrated the loose glass sugar dispensers on the nearest table. "I appreciate it. I just need a warm place to sit down and think for a little while." Clara led him past the front windows, choosing a deep booth in the far corner where the shadow of the unlit pie display offered a small wall of privacy from the road. She handed him a laminated menu that was peeling at the corners, her eyes accidentally catching his left wrist as he reached out to take the paper. There, wrapped around his massive forearm, was a thick, custom-made black band with the exact same "I promise" inscription her daughter carried. Only this one looked heavy, real, and earned. She kept her face completely blank, refusing to let the sudden wild pounding in her chest show in her eyes as she pulled her order pad from her waist. "What can I get started for you tonight, sir?" she asked, her pen hovering over the cheap paper. "Just some black coffee," he said, his dark eyes fixed on her face as he read the small name tag pinned to her uniform. "And whatever you have back there that does not require making a mess of your clean kitchen." "Our chicken and waffles are what we are known for," Clara said, a genuine, unforced warmth breaking through her exhaustion. "My daughter Paige swears they are the best in the state, though she might be a biased judge, since her mother is the one standing over the iron at midnight." The man let out a low, warm chuckle that sounded like old leather, a sound that carried the heavy weariness of someone who lived in the public eye but deeply craved the dark safety of an empty room. "Sounds like a plan, Clara," he said, speaking her name with a slow, respectful weight that made her throat tighten. "You have children?" "Just one," she said, her fingers tightening around the cheap plastic pen. "She is 8, and she is already running circles around the boys on the blacktop." The man nodded very slowly, his cap shifting just enough for the light to expose the unmistakable features of the greatest player to ever lace up a pair of sneakers. "Good dreams to have," he whispered, his voice holding a deep, ancient understanding of what it meant to dream from the dirt. "Keep her playing. I will get that order in right now," Clara said smoothly, turning toward the kitchen before her hands could begin to shake under the sheer gravity of the man sitting in booth 4. The heavy iron waffle maker hissed as Clara poured the thick, sweet batter onto the smoking metal grid. A cloud of warm, vanilla-scented steam rose into the air, momentarily masking the sharp, metallic smell of the old kitchen. Through the small, square, grease-filmed serving window, she could see the silent giant in the corner booth, staring quietly out into the dark, rain-swept street. The rhythmic clanking of the metal spatula in Jerry the cook's hand felt like a distant heartbeat, reminding her of another time, another gym, and another life. 14 years ago, Clara had the starting point guard for the Gary West Side Leadership Academy, her name shouted by packed bleachers under bright Friday night lights. She still remembered the sharp, clean squeak of her sneakers on the polished hardwood and the heavy, intoxicating smell of leather basketballs. An athletic scholarship to Indiana University had been sitting on her high school principal's desk, waiting for her signature until the third quarter of the state semifinal game changed everything. Her right knee had buckled with a sickening, wet pop that echoed louder than the referee's whistle, tearing her ligament and shattering her future in a fraction of a second. The scholarship vanished before the swelling in her joint had even gone down, replaced by a mountain of medical debt and a sudden unexpected pregnancy a year later. When her mother passed away, leaving her completely alone with a newborn baby girl named Paige, Clara had traded her leather basketball for a stained canvas waitress apron. She had learned to bury her own broken dreams deep into the dark corners of her mind, focusing every ounce of her remaining strength on the little girl who now wore her old oversized jerseys to bed. Every double shift, every insult from an arrogant customer, and every blister on her aching feet was just a tax she willingly paid to keep Paige's future alive. The soft chime of the kitchen timer pulled Clara back from the shadows of her memories, the waffle iron popping open to reveal a perfect golden brown crust. She carefully placed the chicken and waffles onto a heavy ceramic plate, dusting it with a light cloud of powdered sugar, just the way her mother used to do. "Here you go, sir," Clara said softly as she set the steaming plate down in the center of the dark booth. The best midnight comfort food in the entire state of Indiana, guaranteed to make the rain outside feel a little further away. The tall man looked down at the food, the rich aroma of maple syrup and fried batter reflecting in the dark, soulful depths of his eyes. He picked up his fork with a slow, deliberate movement that held no rush, cutting a small piece of the crispy waffle and placing it into his mouth. He chewed slowly, his eyes closing for a continuous 3 seconds, as if he were savoring a memory from his own childhood rather than just a cheap diner meal. When he opened his eyes, the heavy exhaustion that had clouded his face since he walked in seemed to lift, replaced by a deep, quiet respect. "Your daughter was right, Clara," he said, his voice dropping into a low, comforting hum that felt completely out of place in the dingy room. "This is not just a meal. This is a reminder of home." "Glad you like it, sir," Clara replied, her voice steady but warm as she wiped the edge of the table with her clean apron. "Everyone deserves a moment of peace and a hot plate of food when they are carrying a heavy load, no matter what the clock on the wall says." The man nodded slowly, his large hand wrapping around his coffee mug, his eyes resting on the old orange "I promise" wristband that was peeking out of Clara's apron pocket. He looked like he wanted to say something more, to peel back the layer of anonymity between them, but the heavy glass door of the office at the back of the diner suddenly slammed open with a deafening crack. "What the hell is going on out here?" Garrick Vance's voice exploded through the quiet room like a gunshot, his heavy, aggressive footsteps shaking the old floorboards as he marched down the center aisle. The sudden noise caused old Thomas to drop his spoon, the metal utensil clattering loudly against his empty plate as the entire diner froze in immediate discomfort. Garrick stood at the edge of booth 4, his face twisted into a mask of pure corporate malice, his veins pulsing violently against his thin neck. He did not look at the massive customers sitting in the shadow of the booth. His furious, bloodshot eyes were locked entirely on Clara's pale face. He snatched the green order pad straight out of her hand, tearing the top sheet off with a violent, ripping sound that echoed off the high ceiling. "The kitchen closed exactly 22 minutes ago, Clara," Garrick hissed, his voice trembling with an insecurity that he tried to disguise as authority. "You have ignored my direct orders for the last time, running up our electricity bill and wasting company ingredients on late-night loiterers. He is just a hungry customer, Mr. Vance," Clara said, her voice remaining completely calm, her posture straight and dignified despite the public humiliation radiating through the room. "He needed a place to eat and get out of the freezing rain." "I don't care if he is the governor of Indiana," Garrick yelled, his face turning a deep, unnatural shade of purple. as he pointed a trembling finger toward the front door. The rules are the rules for a reason, and your little personal charity projects are costing this franchise money we do not have. From the corner of the diner, Jerry the cook stepped out from the kitchen window, his large hands frozen on his apron, exchanging an uncomfortable, helpless glance with old Thomas. The world around Booth 4 seemed to slow down to a painful crawl, the silence pressing heavily against everyone's ears as Garrick crossed a line of basic human decency. Clara did not lower her head, nor did she raise her voice to defend herself. She simply stood her ground like a quiet giant, absorbing the full weight of the man's cruel arrogance without giving him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Unpin your name tag and give me the back door key right now," Garrick growled, his voice dropping into a low, venomous sneer that made the air in the room feel 20 degrees colder. "You are done here, Clara. Pack your pathetic things and get out of my diner before I have the local police remove you for trespassing." The harsh, metallic buzz of the small plastic alarm clock cut through the thin drywall of the apartment at exactly 6:00 a.m. Clara opened her eyes to stare at the water-stained ceiling, her entire body resisting the transition from temporary numbness back into reality. The small kitchen area smelled faintly of old radiator steam and the frozen waffles she was warming up on a chipped baking sheet. She checked her bank application on her cracked phone screen, staring at the numbers $314.12, which was $40 less than the monthly rent due in 48 hours. Down the narrow hallway, the sound of a heavy rubber basketball bouncing rhythmically against the worn carpet signaled that Paige was already awake and dressed. The 8-year-old girl burst into the kitchen area, an oversized yellow high school jersey that hung past her knees like a dress. Her brown eyes were dancing with an electric excitement, a stark contrast to the heavy, exhausted fog settled deep into her mother's face. "Mama, look at my crossover split," Paige said, executing a sharp, low-hesitation move around a rickety kitchen stool with perfect form. "Coach Marcus told me yesterday that if I perform like this at the elite camp on Friday, the high school scouts will know my name before I even graduate middle school." Clara forced a wide, protective smile onto her face, reaching out to catch the ball and pulling her daughter into a tight, lingering hug. "You have the heart of a champion, baby," Clara whispered against her daughter's hair, her throat tightening as she realized the $500 tip from the giant stranger was no longer an extra luxury. It was now their emergency survival fund, meaning the registration form on the counter would remain unsigned and empty. The heavy silence that followed was suddenly interrupted by the loud, shrill vibration of her ancient flip phone resting on the laminate table. The screen displayed a blocked corporate number from the city of Akron, a prefix she had never seen before in her life. She flipped the plastic casing open, her voice trembling slightly as she cleared her throat to answer. "Is this Clara Evans, formerly of the Rusty Anchor Diner?" A sharp, highly professional female voice inquired from the other end of the line. Yes, this is Clara," she replied, shifting her weight away from her daughter so Paige wouldn't see the sudden anxiety blooming in her eyes. "May I ask who is calling?" "My name is Elena Vance, Senior Executive Assistant at the Next Gen Ohio Initiative," the voice stated with mathematical precision. "Mr. James requests your presence at our downtown corporate headquarters at 9:30 a.m. sharp for a formal consultation regarding an administrative opening." Clara froze, her fingers gripping the plastic phone so tightly the casing groaned under the pressure of her hand. She looked over at the kitchen window, where the cold morning sun was barely cutting through the industrial smog of Gary, Indiana. She thought about Garrick's mocking laughter, she thought about her daughter's empty basketball future, and she chose to step into the dark. "I will be there," Clara said, her voice dropping into a firm, resolute register that surprised even herself. "Thank you." The corporate headquarters of the Next Gen Ohio Initiative was a massive 40-story tower of tinted black glass and brushed steel that pierced the gray Midwestern sky like a monument. Clara stood in the center of the grand marble lobby, looking down at her worn church dress and the simple canvas coat that offered very little protection against the biting wind. The security guard at the front desk looked at her identification badge, his professional, bored expression instantly dissolving into a look of profound, silent respect as he pointed toward the private express elevator. The elevator ride to the top floor took less than 20 seconds, the silent pressure change making her ears pop as the numbers flashed by in a blur of white light. The doors glided open to reveal a massive executive suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire industrial grid of the city below. Standing by the glass with his hands tucked into the pockets of a tailored charcoal suit was the same giant who had sat in booth 4 12 hours ago. "Thank you for coming, Clara," LeBron James said, turning around slowly, his massive physical presence filling the elegant room without needing to say a word. There was no baseball cap covering his face today, but his eyes held the exact same watchful, protective warmth that had put her at ease in the middle of the night. "I almost didn't believe the phone call, Mr. James," Clara said, holding her head high and keeping her voice completely steady despite the sheer unreality of the room. "I am just a night shift waitress who broke her company policy to fry some chicken at midnight." "You are exactly what this initiative has been looking for," LeBron replied, stepping forward and sliding a thick blue leather folder across the polished mahogany conference table. "I have plenty of people with fancy business degrees from Ivy League schools who know how to calculate profit margins and cut employee benefits. What I do not have is someone who looks at a tired stranger in a freezing rainstorm and sees a human being instead of a corporate violation." Clara sat down in the heavy leather chair, her fingers touching the crisp edges of the documents inside the folder. The title at the top of the white page read, "Regional Director of Community Outreach and Family Development." Her eyes tracked down to the financial section, where the listed base salary was exactly triple what she earned working 60 hours a week between the diner and the local laundromat. "This cannot be real, Mr. James," Clara whispered, her voice cracking as a single tear escaped her eye and fell onto the clean paper. "I do not have a college diploma or experience managing a multi-million-dollar charitable foundation." "You lived through experience, Clara," LeBron said firmly, leaning forward with his elbows on the table, his dark eyes locking onto hers with absolute sincerity. "You know what it feels like to choose between buying a pair of sneakers for your daughter or paying the gas bill to keep the heat on. The board wanted me to hire a consultant from Chicago, but I told them I wanted someone from the dirt who understands that dignity is not something you buy with a paycheck." Before she could form a reply, the heavy mahogany door of the boardroom opened, and a man in a gray suit entered, sliding an urgent financial audit report directly into the center of the table. LeBron's expression instantly turned serious, his jaw tightening into a hard line as he gestured for the assistant to leave the room. "Before you sign that contract, Clara, I need you to look at something," LeBron said, his voice dropping into a low, testing register that made the temperature in the room feel instantly colder. "Our internal audit team found a major discrepancy in the funding for our youth centers this morning, with over $400,000 marked as pending but recorded as already spent. If this gets out to the regional press, our entire operation could be shut down by the state regulator, and every single kid in Gary loses their court time." Clara pulled the spreadsheet closer, her eyes scanning the rows of numbers, her high school point guard mind instantly calculating the timing of the deposits. She realized within 10 seconds that the numbers had been intentionally shifted by someone inside the office to make the foundation look much wealthier than it actually was to secure a federal grant. She had two choices. She could sign the contract keep her mouth shut and take the life-changing salary to secure Paige's future. Or she could expose the lie and risk blowing the entire opportunity apart. She closed the leather folder with a soft, decisive thud, looking straight into the eyes of the most famous athlete on earth without a single hint of fear. "I cannot sign this, Mr. James," Clara said, her voice completely calm, her spine perfectly straight. "These kids deserve a foundation built on absolute truth, and my daughter Paige does not need a future built on a corporate lie. If your foundation is operating on a deception, then I will gladly go back to looking for another minimum wage job today." LeBron James sat back in his heavy leather chair, the intense, unreadable mask on his face suddenly melting into a broad, booming laugh that echoed off the glass walls. He reached across the polished table, his massive hand gently tapping the blue folder with a deep, profound sense of satisfaction. Clara stood frozen by her chair, her breath caught in her throat as she looked around the boardroom at the smiling faces of the senior executives who had just entered the room. "You just passed the real test, Clara," LeBron said, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute pride that made the air in the room feel warm again. "The financial error you found was a calculated simulation, designed by our legal department, to see if you would protect a high-paying corporate salary or stand up for the truth. We need leaders who cannot be bought by a comfortable paycheck, Clara, because these kids on the street have already been abandoned by too many people with fancy promises. Your integrity is not something that can be taught in a university classroom, and that is why you are officially the executive director of our entire Midwest expansion." Clara sank slowly back into her seat, a wave of profound relief washing over her body so intensely her hands began to tremble on the leather armrests. She looked out the floor-to-ceiling window, where the cold Indiana rain was finally starting to let up, allowing a thin sliver of morning sunlight to illuminate the neighborhood below. She thought about her daughter, Paige. She thought about the $400 camp fee, and she knew their lives had just changed forever. But the transformation of Gary, Indiana, was only just beginning. 2 hours later, the heavy glass doors of the rusty Anchor Diner swung open with a violent chime. But it was not a hungry customer stepping through the entrance this time. Two corporate lawyers wearing tailored gray overcoats walked into the grease-stained room, carrying a stack of legal injunctions and asset purchase agreements stamped by the state court. Garrick Vance stepped out of his back office, his thin face turning a pale, sickly shade of white as he recognized the golden seal of the LeBron James Family Foundation on the legal folders. But the franchise owners sold this entire commercial property to our development initiative at exactly 8:00 a.m. this morning, the lead attorney stated with cold, mathematical finality. "Your employment with this establishment is officially terminated effective immediately due to repeated, documented violations of basic labor standards and ethical misconduct." Garrick dropped his plastic clipboard onto the dirty linoleum floor, his finger shaking uncontrollably as he realized his cruel authority had vanished in a single morning. He looked through the window and saw Clara Evans standing beside a sleek black vehicle, her posture straight and her face holding no malice, only a quiet, heavy solemnity. The local police cruiser arrived 3 minutes later to escort him off the property. His public humiliations, witnessed by the entire neighborhood he had spent years terrorizing under the guise of corporate rules. He was forced to leave with his personal belongings stuffed into a single cardboard box, his mind spinning with the bitter realization that his own arrogance had destroyed everything he spent his life protecting. 6 months flew by like a fast break down a polished hardwood basketball court. The old neon sign that used to read the rusty Anchor Diner was gone, replaced by a massive, brightly lit banner that read, "The Gary Next Gen Youth Center." The grease-stained dining room had been completely flooded and replaced with high-tech training equipment, academic tutoring stations, and a beautiful indoor half-court. made of polished maple wood. Every single afternoon, the building was filled with the beautiful, chaotic symphony of leather basketballs bouncing, children laughing, and shoes squeaking against the clean floor. Clara sat in her new glass-walled office at the front of the center, watching her daughter Paige coach a group of younger third graders on how to execute a proper chest pass. Paige was thriving, her game elevated by the professional training she received over the summer, but her heart remained focused on helping the kids who couldn't afford their own sneakers. The front door of the center opened quietly, and a man with hollow cheeks and a faded denim jacket stepped onto the welcome mat, holding his worn cap in his hands. It was Garrick Vance, looking 10 years older, his former corporate pride completely shattered after months of unemployment and social isolation in the small town. He did not look up at the bright lights. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on his worn boots, his shoulders slumped in a state of absolute defeat. "I heard you were looking for a facilities manager to keep the courts clean and the heating system running," Garrick whispered, his voice trembling with a deep shame that made it difficult for him to look Clara in the eye. "I know I don't deserve to be in this building after what I said to you, but my family is desperate, and I am willing to sweep the floors for minimum wage if it means keeping a roof over my daughter's head." Clara stood up from her desk, walking out of her office with a slow, measured stride that held no anger, only the immense, quiet restraint of a leader. She looked at the man who had once threw her name tag into the dirt, and she chose to show him the exact same grace he had denied her on that freezing winter night. Everyone deserves a second chance when they are willing to look in the mirror and face their mistakes. "Garrick," Clara said softly, her voice echoing through the quiet hallway with an undeniable weight. "The position is yours, but you will treat every single child who walks through that door with absolute dignity and respect, because rules mean nothing if they cost us our humanity." Garrick buried his face in his calloused hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, heavy sobs, as the full weight of his past cruelty and the overwhelming power of her forgiveness finally broke his arrogant spirit. The evening sun dipped low behind the rusted steel mills of Gary, Indiana, painting the broad Midwestern sky in deep shades of gold and amber. Inside the community center, the vibrant sounds of the afternoon basketball league slowly quieted down as the young players headed home for dinner. Garrick Vance moved down the sideline with a wide push broom, carefully collecting the stray dust motes, dancing in the warm geometric beams of light cutting through the clean windows. He stopped near the center court line, his eyes resting on his own daughter, who was practicing free throws under the clean white net with an unforced, beautiful smile. Clara Evans walked down from the front office, her long shadow stretching across the polished maple wood until it touched the edge of the paint. She did not say a single word. She simply stood there for 3 continuous seconds, letting the immense, peaceful silence of the building settle into her bones. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the old, frayed orange silicone band that her daughter had found in the dirt months ago. She walked over to the main display case near the entrance, placing the cheap piece of rubber directly into a small velvet tray, sitting right next to the official, signed championship basketball. That small, warm orange band looked completely out of place inside the expensive glass case, yet it held the entire gravity of the room within its weathered edges. Through the clear glass of the front entrance, Clara caught sight of a sleek black vehicle idling quietly by the concrete curb of Broadway Street. A towering figure sitting in the back seat tilted his head upward slightly, his dark cap shifting just enough for his eyes to lock onto hers through the distant glare of the window. He did not wave or signal. He simply offered a slow, solemn nod of absolute approval before the vehicle pulled away into the golden evening light. Clara turned back toward the court, her hand resting gently on the shoulder of the man who had once tried to destroy her. both of them watching the children chase a dream built on absolute mercy. The greatest victories in this life are never recorded on a stadium scoreboard, Clara whispered, her voice dropping into a soft, comforting hum as the final rays of sunlight disappeared from the floor. They are won in the dark, one quiet act of kindness at a time.